Hey, what is up, everybody? Platform Disciple here. And before we begin, I want to say that I have not been doing my free-to-play ranked as much as I should. As you can see, I've fallen a little behind, but I don't think I've fallen behind enough to the point where I'm not going to get top 100 if I put my mind to it. But I think that if I'm going to reach top 100, I don't think it would be good for me to record every single game because it's just going to take more time for me and I won't be able to pull off my goal ultimately. Of course, you might be wondering, well, if you don't record the games, how are we going to hold you to using the free-to-play deck? And the answer is that if any of you manages to queue up against me in ranked and you see me with something other than my free-to-play deck, then you know there that I'm fibbing and that it's all a hoax. But it's not a hoax. So I promise that if I queue up against you in ranked, you will see the deck that I have been using. So no worries there. But I just wanted to let you know that I'm probably not going to record nearly as many matches as I play. Because I do want to get top 100, and I just don't think it's possible to record them all. Next on the agenda, I want to talk about the actual thing we're going to do today, which is we're going to have a little discussion about Klore, because this is a very, very interesting card. And I've talked a little about Klore before, but let's talk about him more before I get into a deck tech later on. So let's talk about Klore. So obviously, Klore is a very, very powerful card for a commander in Flame Dawn. So much so that, in my opinion, and I think this is not an unusual opinion, I think most people share this opinion, if you have 2 Flame Dawn Purity or more, it's generally speaking bad not to have Klore in the command zone. And what I mean by this is that there are no cards that can compete with Klore for the command zone slot. There's no card you could put in the command zone slot instead of Klore that would be better for a 2 Flamed On or 3 Flamed On deck. And of course, Klore is a very powerful card, so that's not surprising. And you might be thinking, well, does this mean that Klore is overpowered if there's no other card that you could possibly run that's going to compete with him? And I'm going to argue that, I think Klore is very strong. Like, I'd still use him even if he got nerfed slightly, but I don't think he's overpowered, and I'm going to explain that. What I do think is that there aren't enough alternatives to Klore, both because, I think Flame Dawn has an extremely linear strategy, meaning that it puts characters in the assault zone and tries to kill the opponent in almost every game. There are very, very few Flame Dawn decks that are not going to use that strategy. And because of that, anything with 2 Flame Dawn, Klore caters to that linear strategy so well that there's not really a reason not to use him. Like, for example, I'm trying to remember the name of the card. Proctol. Proctol is a card that does not cater to the linear Flame Dawn, put everything in the assault zone strategy, but there's nothing to support Proctol as a card at the moment, or at least not in 2 or 3 Flame Dawn in a way that would like if you're running Proctol in the command zone in 2 or 3 Flame Dawn, it's weird, probably not a particularly good deck, and you would benefit from having Klore in addition to or instead of Proctol. Whereas if you look at other factions, like, for example, the Overseers have Tempest, which is similar to Klore in some ways, in that it's an extremely, extremely powerful 1-drop command zone card for 2 Purity that caters to the general strategy of Overseers in almost every Overseers deck, because Every Overseer's deck is going to be deploying Angels, and the card's just very good. But the difference is that Flame Dawn has no other cards that are worth running in the command zone. Whereas if you're in Overseers, there's actually several cards that are very potent commanders that you can run in addition to or instead of Tempest. Notably, one that I'm thinking of, I mean, we'll just actually go through the list, and I'm going to point out ones that you might even run instead of Tempest. So Z is a potential commander. Azael I've seen as a commander. I don't like it very much because it's telegraphed, but I've seen it. Declarius is an extremely good commander. Gabrielle's pretty good. Harahel is not bad. A lot of the champions in general are not bad. Lilaria, both versions of Lilaria are pretty good. Razael is, here's one of the critical ones, is that Razael is very similar to Tempest and does a different thing and caters to a different strategy. Because Tempest generally, you want to have lots of characters and play them and generally put them in the assault zone, whereas Razael benefits a lot from being in the assault zone by himself. So they fit a very similar slot. You could use them both in the command zone, but they have conflicting strategies, which is good because it means that there's more than one option. Likewise, for something like Veror, you have cards like Agent Coil, Aether Acolyte. Malignus is an important one because so just to compare, I think that Veror's version of Klore would probably be Rita, right? Rita's a very, very safe card to have in the command zone in almost any Veror deck with one or more purity. So reliable, very good at almost every stage of the game. But there are cards that you can run instead. Like, for example, the Tinker combo deck opts to have 2 Aether Acolytes because they just want Aether Acolytes so bad. And you'll see, like, some Veror decks are running Malignant just because they want one more Malignant instead of Rita. I use Martyr of Death in one of my decks. Point is, there are other options. Thunder Apprentice is not bad either. That you can use these cards instead of Rita, but in Flame Dawn, there is not a single character that you can look at and think, I would like to use that over Klore. You might say, oh, I might use this in addition to Klore, because obviously there are 3 commanders, but it's very hard to justify using it instead of Klore. And the icing on the cake is that Klore is a very hard card to come by because he is a legendary. And this does hurt new players in some ways. I think that I think it would be better if there were more commander options for Flame Dawn. Not necessarily ones that are more powerful, but ones that cater to a different strategy. And what I'm going to do today is present to you a deck tech for a Flame Dawn deck that does not use Klore, and you can justify it. And by that I mean we're not using Klore and we don't want to use Klore. And some of you may have seen this deck before. This is my take on it. But the reason we're not using Klore is because we want as many infected purifiers in the command zone as possible. And we're using Shirazias the Cruel in the command zone. And Shirazias does 3 damage to each character in the same zone, meaning that these infected purifiers are going to take 3 at the end of the first turn and 3 at the end of the second turn. And when these die, instead they move to the support zone and are transformed into undead. So you'll have 7, 5 undeads. And this happens while they're in the command zone, which means Shirazias is going to kill them, and you're going to get 2 free 7/5s. So you're basically swapping a large portion of your command zone for these free characters, which is a different kind of strategy than, or at least it does the same thing differently than how Klore does it. Klore plays a hit and run game, whereas this deck, unlike some other Flame Dawn decks, is even more aggressive because what you're trying to do is end the game as quickly as possible because you've thrown your command zone away for the opportunity to have a better early game. And we're going to take a look at it. So I was running Martyr Golems in this, but because part of the point of this video is that Klore is a legendary that a lot of new players don't have, I decided to take Martyr Golems out because that's another legendary that a lot of new players don't have. But the deck, a lot of the cards are fairly typical for Flame Dawn decks. We've got Torchbearer, Flame Dawn Commando, Cowardly Recruit, Paladin of the Flame Dawn, Fleeting Footman, and then we've got a couple unusual ones coming up. Reckless Zealot, and this is because this deck can actually justify giving your opponent an extra resource. If you can get in for 10 damage, it's worth it. And this deck, because it puts out 2 7/5s, which generally clear most defenders, it's much easier to get in with the 10-4. Likewise, Rapier Fanatic is much more likely to connect with the opponent's fortress because you're going to have more characters than usual. Sackless for direct damage, Flagbearer, and 2 Cavalry Paladins. Then for abilities, we've got Bombard, which is really nice because it can directly target your opponent's fortress, but it's also very good for getting rid of defenders. Flashbang also gets rid of defenders. Intimidating Rally, once again, gets rid of defenders. Call the Crusade, good at just putting more guys out. Because what we're trying to do is none of our characters we don't care about them staying alive. We want to pressure the board with charge characters every turn so that even if our board gets board wiped, we can continue to do damage the next turn by playing more charge characters. And Call of the Crusade is basically like a charge character. We have 1 Pyre Fortress of Dawn and 1 Bromix Banner. The reason we only have 1 of each is because we don't ever want to draw a second copy of these cards, but it's very good to have 1. And that's basically the deck. So we're just going to hop into a normal game and show you how it goes. And I suspect that this game will be very, very short. All right, here we go. So we're up against a 2 Overseers, 1 Veror deck. And as we can see, some of the commanders I mentioned are in there. No Rita. This probably was a choice because most people own Rita. And in addition to that, we see Raziel instead of Tempest. So we're just seeing a different kind of deck. And one thing that we got to keep in mind is that there are a couple cards that are cross-faction between Overseers and Veror. We have Angel's Bane, which is the 2-cost 6/6 who can overcharge an Overseers card to exhaust a character. And then there's also Regicide. And Regicide has very little effect on us because we don't actually play our commanders except Shirazias later on. So, I don't know. I'm tempted to use Bombard here just to put Raziel out of his misery. I'm also tempted to play Cowardly Recruit, but we have no charge character follow-up Cowardly Recruit with, so he won't be able to attack. So I think we might do Torchbearer. Raziel's going to hit us for 1 and or hit us for 4, and then next turn we can bombard him. That's my thought right now. So yeah, he came out, and I don't think he's going to defend his Raziel. So we're going to hit the Raziel, and I would move into the assault zone now, but we would get a very poor trade with Aether Acolyte, so we're going to wait 1 turn. So he did not defend, which is interesting. And as you can see, we are off to a crazy start now. That's the nature of this deck, is that we've swapped our command zone for some extreme burst damage, and it's going to be a while before he's going to be able to deal with this. I'm tempted to use Bombard right here, right now, on Gabrielle, but I'm also tempted to get in for the 14 damage, which is almost guaranteed connect this turn. The problem with using Bombard is that it's a bad tempo play because I don't use all of my resources. But Rapier Fanatic is also a bad tempo play because he dies. So it's a tough choice. The turn after, if I play Rapier Fanatic, I can play Bombard for 2 and then play a 1-drop for 2. Or I can play Bombard now and then... So as you can see, I'm thinking that if I draw a 1-drop, it's going to be better to play Rapier Fanatic this turn. Then again, I can play the 1-drop next turn either way. Ugh. Tough decisions. I I think we're going to do Rapier Fanatic in the case that he doesn't play Gabrielle. We don't want it to miss. He did play Gabrielle, so maybe I should have used the Bombard. But he used up his whole turn just to get Gabrielle out and took a ton of damage for it. And we got a Flamed on Commando. So, Flamed on Commando this. We're going to hold on to the Bombard, I think, because Bombard is not going to do anything by hitting the Aether Acolyte. It's also not going to do anything by hitting his Fortress for 4. We're only going to use the direct damage aspect if he's low enough for him to die. Also, holding onto a card in our hand does something for us because we can overcharge it with Intimidating Rally later. Okay. Vanish is one of our guys. We can still trade here. Reckless Zealot might be pretty nice. It's pretty guaranteed to connect. The one card we have to worry about him playing right now is... actually, there's a couple cards that he could play that have Vigilance. One is Rescue Angel, which costs 5, but that's a very unusual one to use. And then there's also Zealous Protector or Zealous Defender. I'm not sure, but he's the 3 cost for 12 that has Vigilance, and whenever he kills a character, he gets flying, or he ascends and gets flying. We could also play Shirazius. It connects for a lot of damage and would only kill our Flamed on Commando, so it's not a bad move. We could actually pull back the Flamed on Commando. This does the most damage for us. It also means if he plays a Vigilance character, we clear it. And he did not. Oh! Well played. That was a well-placed Regicide. Wasn't ready for that. And because he's only got 1 Bearer, we don't have to care about Mass Death. So we can play our Flag Bearer, and we're going to go ahead and play our Reckless Zealot this turn. So this is going to get bumped back, probably. And we have 12 damage here represented. So if he plays the Vigilance character, it'll clear it. And if he doesn't, we've got a total of 16, 20, 31 damage, which is very, very close to lethal. It's not quite lethal, but I think we can easily deal the remaining 5 damage. We've got 4 represented in our hand with Bombard. And we have a ton of charge characters, so this is a no problem scenario. I don't know why he wouldn't defend here. It just doesn't make sense to me. And we're gonna Intimidating Rally. Stumble both of his characters. And we're moving this to the back, of course, because it retreats when it actually meets a defender, so we always want that character at the back. And I suspect that this is game over for him. If he can deal 91 damage with Magic Cipher, I would have been seriously impressed. Yeah, not quite enough. So I think it's very clear what the deck's trying to do now. I don't know if that showcased the full potential of the deck, because the deck we were playing against was also a serious fringe deck. Like, that's just not a very common deck for you to see. But this deck can hold up against tier 1 decks, especially if they're not ready for it, because of just the speed at which the deck operates. is so high. It kills people faster than the normal triple Flamed On deck that uses Klore. And I'm going to bring that up, or at least my version of that up. And the reason why it kills them faster is because the deck that I just showed you has no fallback plan at all. Whereas this deck, the normal Flamed On deck, is a little more resilient. You're going to notice that a lot of the cards are the same, but having larger characters and having more cards in the command zone to use can make the deck just a little more likely to make pushes later on in the game. I mean, to be fair, this list is so similar, but point is that you can play 2 Flamed On aggro without Klore and feel very good about it. The only cards you need are going to be Shirazias, who is not that hard to come by, and if you need one, I have a strong feeling that most players would be willing to trade you it because it's a very weird card that most people don't use. And Infected Purifier, which is an uncommon, also pretty easy to come by. So I encourage you, for those of you who do not own Klore but want to play Flamed On, I strongly believe that you're going to be better off using Infected Purifier and Shirazias together than using a budget Klore, like putting a different card in your command zone. Like, for example, if I didn't have Klore, I might run like maybe I'd be running maybe I'd be running Flamed On Footman in the command zone instead. This deck, now that I've put Flamed On Footman there, I think is not as good as the Shirazias deck. It's hard to believe that such a small change like that makes that big of an impact, but I think it does. And I hope you all enjoyed the video, and until next time, everybody, peace out.